I tell you what, it's not like the olden days. I'm Jake.
I'm Rosie.
And this is our podcast on the Animals of Farthing Wood, which was a cartoon series that aired on children's BBC in 3 series at the very beginning of 1993 and the very beginning of 1994, and then September to December 1995. And it's based on a series of children's novels by Olden Days, the first of which was published in 1979. So we will talk to you now about our experiences with the 3 series of the Animals of Farthing Wood, their pros and cons, and lingering feelings we have about them. The first series of the Animals of Farthing Wood is a fairly faithful adaptation of the first novel, which was originally published in 2 parts in 1979, and then thereafter has always appeared in one single volume. And Rosie first read this quite recently, didn't you, and wasn't that impressed with it?
I thought it was really boring. If I may say now what I think about the first series of the cartoon show, we'd actually watched it quite recently to remember what it was like and in preparation of this podcast, and I was surprised by how much I enjoyed it. And then I read the book and I thought, God, this is really flat. The characters have no character. So, sorry, Colin Dan, but your attempt to rip off Watership Down didn't really work for me.
I used to read the books when I was young, and I think I used to enjoy them. There were some things that I thought were better in them than in the TV series, and some things I thought were worse. I haven't read them for about 10 years, so I shall be interested quite soon to go back and see what shortcomings the books do have. Should we just say specifically now, get it out of the way, some of the things that Watership Down did inspire in the Animals of Farthing Wood, or Colin Dan ripped off from Watership Down, as we promised we would last time? The snare is a big one, isn't it?
Funnily enough, that's not in the book, so as well as Colin Dan ripping off Watership Down, so did the cartoon series when they were seeing what they might like to change and add. The snare is one thing. If you want to compare the two, the baby rabbit getting caught in a snare doesn't seem to be nearly as uncomfortable or in as much pain or as near to death as when it happens to Bigwig. It's a bit less bloody and graphic.
It's much easier for Mole to dig the peg out in the Animals of Farthing Wood than all the digging and chewing for hours that they have to do in Watership Down book, isn't it?
That's true. Mole is a better digger than rabbits, of course. Another thing that's not in the book, but they have very briefly in the cartoon series, is Rabbit having a sore paw. Is there a thorn in it? I've forgotten now.
I think he's trodden on a thistle, in fact.
That's extremely similar to having a thorn in it, and that's in the book Watership Down. It doesn't make it into the film, so obviously they bothered reading the book and didn't just watch the film to rip it off. Things which are in both books and adaptations are having to cross a road. The Watership Down rabbits don't actually have to cross a motorway like the Animals of Farthing Wood. The Animals of Farthing Wood have to cross a smallish road, then a motorway later on. And having to cross a river is another thing. Classic obstacles, I suppose, if you're a group of animals. And obviously there's the whole premise that their home is being built over, destroyed, not necessarily in that order, and so they have to leave to find a new one.
Yes, so when I thought to myself, what's she watching? Oh, it's the Animals of Farthing Wood with just rabbits. When you were watching Watership Down, I wasn't at all wrong, was I? Because that's pretty much what the Animals of Farthing Wood is. Again, you get the theme of mankind spoiling the earth and ousting the animals from their homes thoughtlessly, which is why, of course, the Animals of Farthing Wood are making this journey from Farthing Wood to White Deer Park, which is their very own version of Watership Down. And like in Watership Down, throughout the story, you get many instances of man's careless, callous hand affecting the animals' lives in ways such as the snare and the road
and
the farm, and also with things such as cigarette butts starting fire in the marshland and poisoned cabbages, and of course the big one, which we'll talk about in a little more detail in a moment, fox hunting. Well, I'll just say now that two main things I thought weren't so good about the first series of The Animals of Farthing Wood, and we'll come on to some better aspects of it afterwards. Before I say that, though, I will tell you that I first found The Animals of Farthing Wood on the telly during its initial run when we were about 4 episodes in, and the first episode I watched was actually the one where Mrs. Pheasant gets shot and killed by the farmer, and then as if that wasn't traumatizing enough, I came back the next week and saw Mr. Pheasant getting shot as well, and then at the end the part where Fox and Badger get swept away by the debris in the river. And I thought, what the hell is this cartoon? It's some kind of animal snuff film. And, well, I wasn't far off, really. Of course, it's a series, not a film. But we picked it up as it went through, and then we came back and watched and recorded the repeat run. And it wasn't as full of death as those 2 episodes may have made it appear. Of course, Fox and Badger both survived that experience in the river, as became apparent in the very next episode. But when we were watching it quite recently, as Rosie was mentioning, there were 2 things about the series that disappointed me slightly, looking at it with adult eyes. The first was that the animals never really developed a good group dynamic and a good cooperative way of doing things that they consistently use throughout their journey, which you would hope and expect to see in a team that is thrown together and helps each other to overcome various obstacles. When we had the bit where the animals were rescuing Badger from the river and he was caught in the weeds, and Weasel was driving the animals with the sharp teeth to go under and chop through the weeds and save Badger. Please save Badger, as Mole says. It's very much signs that they're perhaps developing a good group dynamic and coming together to help one another against their natural instinct, which is supposed to be what the Oath of Mutual Protection is all about. And then, unfortunately, in the next scene, that all goes out the window, and they're bickering and arguing and blaming each other for nothing and not really coming together as a team, and I found that rather disappointing, and I didn't think they ever pulled together as a band of animals should, fighting against man in this situation.
I agree with you about that, actually. It's a shame. I can't remember now if Colin Down attempts to show that moment in the book, but if he does, he completely rips it off from Watership Down, where they learn to work as a team, defeating the rats in the barn.
Yeah, I think Watership Down does that much better, certainly, than the cartoon series of Farthing Wood, probably than the book as well. The second problem I had, really, with the first series of Farthing Wood was that it didn't really mesh its different tones and genres and ways it was trying to make us feel very well, I thought. Now, I love to watch something that's bittersweet and makes me feel all different emotions, but of course it has to be meshed together properly and take you on a coherent journey through those emotions. Otherwise, you just get a bit emotionally adrift, not sure whether you're supposed to be laughing, crying, happy, sad at any one time. A couple of examples I had of that. There's quite a dark bit where Mr. Pheasant is volunteering to go back to the farmyard, and he has, it seems, lost the will to live. I was saying, oh, he's going back committing suicide, like he wants to go back and get shot by the farmer. And perhaps he's not actually specifically going back because he wants to get shot by the farmer, but he's certainly lost the will to live, and he's saying, without my wife, there's no point carrying on, so I might as well go back and risk my life.
To get Ada, by the way, who they've left behind.
Yes, and she was doing some good teamwork there, distracting the dog.
All that hissing and stuff.
So that was quite a dark and sombre moment, and it's very much the culmination of Mr. Pheasant being very fussy and always afraid of being shot and, pompous and that sort of thing, and got Mrs. Hare saying, oh, I can see why he was so afraid now, and, it's quite a serious moment. And then before you've really come to terms with that emotionally, we're straight into Weasel doing bad singing and everyone covering their ears, and we're supposed to be laughing at it. And I didn't think the transition was made appropriately, with the right timing, with the right feeling. It's not something you can really put a finger on that, is it? How they transition it. but I did feel, as I say, emotionally adrift at times in the series. My other example is in the motorway episode, where one minute the hedgehogs get run over and everyone's terribly upset, and the next we're supposed to be laughing at Ada being carried over the motorway by Whistler, dangling like a maggot. It's not well paced.
That was an impression of Toad you just did, wasn't it?
Yes.
I have to admit I didn't really feel that way watching the first series. I was very impressed with the first series. I thought, hey, I didn't remember it was this good. I did get that at the end of the second series, with the ultimate, if you like, example of that, I think it is, where Mrs. Rabbit has been eaten by Scarface, the antagonist in the series, and then shortly afterwards, Rabbit, who's been crying and sad, gets hiccups and is forced by Weasel's new mate, Measley, who's a comedy character, to hold his breath and count to 100, and Measley's counting to 100 incredibly slowly, and then he lets go of Rabbit's mouth, and Rabbit goes shooting off like a balloon that you've just blown up and let go of. So at that stage, I thought, well, that's not quite right, is it?
I think in many ways that phenomenon is worse in the second series, or certainly as bad, particularly as the second series has more dark and death-filled moments than the first. The one thing that I was very impressed with in the first series was the foreshadowing of the hunt. Now, we actually had on video, on Rosie's special tape, that she recorded a few things she liked on. There was a couple of episodes of Blind Date.
Yes, there were.
And a couple of episodes of The Animals of Farthing Wood. And one of them...
Wildlife on One.
Oh, David Attenborough was
yes.
on there. And one of the episodes, there was the final episode of Farthing Wood on there eventually, and there was also episode 8, which has the hunt, fox hunt, coming after Fox and Vixen, and Fox gets reunited at the end with the rest of the animals who he hasn't seen since he was swept down the river, and Vixen comes to join them, and there's a lot of tension in that episode about escaping from the hunt. And I thought, in the lead up to that episode, from the time where Fox becomes separated, there's actually a lot of good build-up to the payoff with the big chase and the big hunt sequence at the end. Fox, when he's making his way back to the other animals, meeting Vixen along the way, meets a couple of other animals who offer him shelter for the night. And the first one of those is very funny, isn't he? Tom, the supermarket cat.
And he's about the only thing that's not in the book.
Yes, about.
There are a couple of smaller things, but he's certainly the only character, and that's the only sequence of events that is a big thing in the cartoon but isn't in the book, is what I mean.
And Fox catches a few mice so Tom can have a night off, and Tom does this very funny assessment of how the humans treat him, how they are towards him. Better give him something extra special to make him better. We are like that with our pampered pet cats, aren't we?
Yes.
Ron Moody on fine form there as Tom, I thought. And then Fox goes on to meet a horse, and he starts having this conversation with the horse, also Ron Moody, and it turns out that this horse is a retired hunting horse. And it's quite a sinister conversation. Obviously, the horse himself means Fox no harm, but the sinister undertones are there. Funny thinking about it. I've been hunting foxes all my life, and here I am chatting to you. And of course, this is big hunting country. You'd better watch out. So that's quite effectively done, I think. And then when he meets Vixen, they will talk about it. I've often heard the horn blow, said Vixen. I suppose one day my turn will come. And, well, it's not far off, actually, but not as terminal as she fears. And then you get Vixen asking the guest star owl, not our main owl in the group, if he's seen the Animals of Farthing Wood passing by, but the owl thinks she's just asking about foxes, and he says, not many foxes in the woods nowadays. And that again is saying, well, why not? Because the hunt's around, that's why. So I think it was well portended, and the payoff with the hunt is good.
Watching that fox hunting sequence was one of the times I've been most excited in my life watching TV or a film. And how old was I?
Must have been coming up to 8. So yes, you must have been like 7 when it was on.
And I didn't know very much about fox hunting. I had a vague notion of it, and then this massive running, chasing, panting, exhausted, she'll never make it sequence. I was so excited, which is why I had to have the episode on my special tape.
Probably would go forward on any sane person's list as the best episode of the Animals of Farthing Wood, I should think, that one.
And of course, Fox is trying to get Vixen to stay with him and the group and be his mate, so he runs in to try to save her. And it's tremendously exciting. And I think it was after that I started watching it religiously.
It's very good as well, where Ada steps in, as it very much were, unexpectedly to save the day by striking at the horse's leg. Of course, you don't realise when you're young, Ada has not actually killed the horse, it's too big, but it is injured and limps away. But that's one example of Ada showing her reluctant but very fiercely loyal nature. She's a great character.
I remember. I won't go on about this too much, but I was reading it thinking, well, hang on a minute, this is exactly the same as the cartoon series, and I've just been surprised by how much I enjoyed the cartoon series. Why aren't I enjoying this? Of course, it's impossible not to compare it to Watership Down, if you're me, and they're much too aware of the human world, and they can actually tell the time. And they might as well be able to read as look at the village clock and say, oh look, it's 11:30, half an hour to our meeting.
That's a big step too far, really, isn't it?
And before I read the book, I noticed in the cartoon series badgers saying, oh, they keep cutting down our trees and destroying our homes so they can build their brick and glass boxes. And I was thinking, well, hang on a minute, Toad's talking about jam jars. They know about human things, and at one point Al mentions Confucius, which possibly is a step too far. So at the time I was thinking, oh, they haven't bothered about making them really, really in their animal world as much as Watership Down. But I didn't mind that too much, but when I read the book, they were going on about swimming pools, and Fox has an encyclopedic knowledge of motorways and what they're like and how long it takes to build them, and telling the time on the clock. And I just started reading In the Grip of Winter last night or the night before, and they were talking about 6 months. Animals have no concept of months. So, as you can tell, I don't think much of the books, especially when I compare them to Watership Down, but the cartoon series, I enjoyed it more than I thought I would this time around.
I'm going to be very interested to read the books again after all these years, having learned about things such as creative writing courses and so on. But we'll just, I think, mention the deaths in Series 1, come back to that, and then use that to link into Series 2. Now, the lizards from the book become the newts in the TV series, goodness knows why, and there's some ambiguity about the newt family's death. They are left behind at their own insistence in the marsh when the fire spreads, and everyone's like, oh, the newts are dead now because of the fire. But I think it's quite right to say, well, perhaps they're not, as the magazine Farthing Wood Friends, which we used to get, tells us. Perhaps they stayed in water and survived, and I'm sure they did stay in the water. They're newts, for goodness sake.
Yes, given that they're newts and they were wanting water and their baby was dying because there was no water and they were in the water when they said goodbye and good luck, I suspect they stayed in the water, especially once they noticed there was a fire.
Yes, I think the newts should definitely be on the unknown list, not the death list.
Apart from the fact that it's newts, not lizards, that whole sequence really is pretty much identical to how it is in the book. Mole goes to look for worms and gets separated from them, and he gets saved by one of the firemen. And that was the bit that I really started to think this is exactly the same but boring. But anyway.
Then there's the pheasants, which we've already discussed in great detail. And what's different about the book is they split up the pheasant deaths there. perhaps doing them slightly more effectively in the cartoon, making more of them.
Oh god, definitely. Colin Dan again tries to copy Richard Adams by starting to write the sequence about the farm and the farm characters, which happened in Watership Down. I don't think he does it very well. Also, when they're drinking out of the swimming pool, he starts saying Mr. Somebody or other was really proud of his new swimming pool. I didn't think that worked. But anyway, in the book, this farmer's going around and he shot a pheasant and then he shot another pheasant. And you think, okay, is it the Farthing Wood pheasants? Is it different pheasants? And then about 3 pages later, it's just like, oh, and the pheasants weren't there anymore because they'd been shot. I was very unimpressed by this.
Yeah, I think they were right to make more of it on the TV show, and they did have the running theme of Mr. Pheasant and his fear of being shot, but little did we know he was even more afraid of his wife being shot first. Could have been very effective, that, but again, as I say, didn't have the right emotional journey for me. Then you get the baby field mice getting killed by the red-backed shrike, the butcher bird, who is a very funny character, actually, when he's telling Fox about the group of animals. A whole bunch of lunatics moaning, going on, and all because of a few mice. But that was quite disturbing, seeing the baby mice impaled on the thorn bushes, wasn't it?
Yes, that's about the one bit of actual blood you get, I think, and actual corpses, unless you count Mrs. Pheasant having been plucked and cooked.
And you see her in silhouette through the barn window. You'll be as dead as this bird.
That's right.
And it wasn't Toad that time, it was the farmer. Then you get the baby rabbit in the pheasant shoot, which is not in the book. And I was speculating while we were watching the series that perhaps this had originally been designed as a kind of replacement death for the hedgehog death on the motorway, which in the book happens in a rather brief, unfeeling paragraph at the end of the chapter. 2 of the older hedgehogs, yes, there's a lot more animals in the book than they can bother drawing on the screen, of course.
A lot more mice and voles get impaled by the butcher bird in the book.
2 of the elderly hedgehogs didn't make it and got run over, but the rest of the hedgehogs carried on to White Deer Park. Well, fine. So obviously they had a decision to make in the TV series. Are we going to kill off our 2 hedgehogs on the motorway, Mr. and Mrs. Hedgehog, or are they going to make it to White Deer Park? And I do think it's possible that at one point they said, well, let's kill a baby rabbit instead in this episode. But then, in the end, they've gone for both the hedgehogs as well, and they get run over by a lorry, which I always thought was rather more disturbing than it needed to be.
If you listened to the Watership Down podcast and heard me saying, having seen the Animals of Farthing Wood, I was sort of expecting the rabbits to get picked off one by one on the journey. This will tell you why. The hedgehog death is the one that I found the most moving. I've told you about how I didn't really mind that sort of thing when I was young, and that's why I do like Watership Down. But I did find that one quite affecting because they're a hedgehog couple who love each other very much, and they pretty much doom themselves by having that conversation. I wonder what White Deer Park will be like.
Lots of white deer, I suppose.
Trees and fields, and it sounds lovely. And they're trying to help each other across, and all the way through, well, some of the way through, Mr. Hedgehog has been a bit braver or more confident than Mrs. Hedgehog, but then he completely freaks out on the road and she's trying to help him along, and they're going, whatever you do, don't curl up, and then of course they curl up and they get squashed by a lorry.
Her earlier repetition of his catchphrase, I'll second that, is a sign that you're both about to be killed if nothing else is.
She wouldn't leave him, says Vixen. So I found that one quite moving. But I didn't cry or anything because I only cried when Mum's died until I was well into my teens.
And then you're supposed to laugh at Whistler and Adder and Toad, and it doesn't really work. But there we go, I said that earlier. I was saying when we were watching it, wasn't I, the whole attempt to cross the motorway by the gang was rather bad and rather haphazard and not really helping each other. Whistler carried a lot of the smaller animals over. He didn't carry the hedgehogs. Oh dear, you are too prickly, so you can just die. I mean, why didn't they ride on Fox and Badger, for goodness sake? Just cling on over 3 lanes of traffic wouldn't have been so bad. And my other idea was that Kestrel should have found them a footbridge to use. And Owl should have stayed on the far side to mark the point where they had to get back to. That would have been proper teamwork.
Hazel would have thought of that.
Yes, but there we go. As I say, that's going to link us into the second series.
That's all the deaths, is it?
Yeah, which first aired in the very early part of 1994. And it's based on the sequel books In the Grip of Winter,
Boring.
Fox's Feud, The Fox Cub Bold, and introduces some aspects from The Siege of White Deer Park, which is not actually fully adapted into a TV series per se. Now, I say that death is going to link us into it because I think the big problem with Series 2, in addition to the style clash, which Rosie was talking about earlier, the big problem is there's far too much death in it. I think it worked out at least as averaging out as one named character per episode. Certainly more than one named or related character who never really spoke before it got killed per episode, and I do think they overdid it. A lot of them are based on deaths in the books, yes, but because they're all squished together 3 books into one series, they do come fast and hard, and, well, it can hit you quite hard at times.
Vole dies for absolutely no reason, doesn't he?
Vole has been found dead.
Poor Vole. He freezes to death in this very difficult, very hard winter, and Fox and Vixen and Badger and the other meat-eaters are starving. The herbivores get given some hay by the white deer, which the warden leaves them. But anyway, I remember saying, I think the oath of mutual protection ought to extend to agreeing to donate your body if you freeze to death.
Oh, that's a good idea.
I think Fox and Vixen could have kept themselves going with Vole's body.
You very much get in Series 2 a feeling of, so White Deer Park isn't this safe haven that they were hoping for.
I was pointing that out, and you said White Deer Park is an effing terrible place.
It is rather.
And you're not wrong.
I mean, the harsh winter's not really White Deer Park's fault, but Scarface and his clan of foxes having their feud with Farthing Wood foxes for no real reason. I mean, Scarface really gets a bit screwed over by the Farthing Wood foxes with all this farthing land nonsense. And then, of course, Scarface gets very annoyed because poachers come and start shooting foxes from his family because they think it's Farthing Wood fox who's made them fall into the river and stuff, and that's linking in the Grip of Winter and Fox's Feud, I suppose, in a believable and appropriate way.
I've always thought Scarface doesn't really give a damn about his children unless he can blame Fox and go and get revenge when they die. If they die of other causes, like getting shot by the farmer whilst foraging, he doesn't really mind.
Yes, he's a thoroughly nasty character, Scarface, but I did quite like some of his acumen, some of his true and perceptive remarks about the human world and cruelty of humans, and the fact that the animals couldn't really do anything about it. When he's saying about the poachers, Lady Blue, his mate, is saying, oh, they've gone now, hooray, and Scarface is saying they'll be back, and when they are back, they'll be angry. He understands things quite well, and perhaps understands that it's a cruel and savage world, and that's why he is cruel and savage to survive in it. Let's talk about some of the deaths. As I say, understandable, mostly. They're in the books, okay, Scarface has to eat a few animals just to facilitate the plot, fine, but let's talk about Mole. Now, the thing that they introduce from The Siege of White Deer Park, which is the 4th sequel, so it's quite a long time after this point where we're up to in the TV series. In that book, Mole has passed away after several years, naturally, and his son Mossy takes his place in senile old Badger's affections, and Badger doesn't acknowledge that Mossy isn't Mole and there's no difference between them because he's old and senile and he misses Mole. Now, by bringing this forward so much, they made it so that Mole doesn't survive the first winter in White Deer Park, and suddenly he was so old, says Mapeless.
She defines herself by her marital status.
Yes, and we're like, oh, okay then, if you say so. And they do all that stuff with Badger and Mossy there after the first winter. And, well, it's a bit too early, I think. It doesn't seem like the journey they were taking Mole on as one of the main gang in the first series. It's seems rather a cruel way to treat the mole-loving audience coming back for series 2.
I can see why they thought that they couldn't have Mole and Mossy at the same time, because they're exactly the same, but perhaps instead they ought not to have bothered.
Yes.
Just kept him as Mole.
Or what about if they'd saved Mossy up for the 3rd series and done all the stuff with Badger and Mossy then? Oh, they couldn't, you say? I wonder why not. Well, because in the 2nd series of the Animals of Farthing Wood, they kill off Badger, which is something that does not happen in the books, and Badger has the very final word in Battle for the Park, the final book in the series, old and feeble as he is at the time. Now, much as I don't approve of what they did with Mole in Series 2, I understand it because it does come from the books, albeit they did it far, far, far too early, but there is absolutely no precedent for what they did with Badger. Now, of course, they show him enough respect not to have him be horribly shot and mutilated and run over and stuff like some of the others. He passes away peacefully in his set, and everyone is sad and sombre about it, and it certainly rings true with having old people around in real life. But there was no precedent for it. It was a horrible, cruel thing to do to the young viewing audience. I thought at the time, they're not really doing this, are they? Oh my God, what do they think they're doing? And I still really feel that way. Why do you think they did?
They might have felt that there wasn't really a lot for Badger to do. He wasn't having a lot to do with the plot that they were making with Scarface and everything. It was just sort of sitting around and occasionally saying something.
Yes, I think that's a valid concern they could have had about the character. But I think, like in the books, they could have turned him more into a background character, occasionally a father figure to go to for advice, and perhaps involve the other Badgers, Shadow and Urkel, more in the actual story. But obviously you want to keep Badger around as your kind of guru figure, and an unforgivable decision, I think.
I thought they were trying to do a moving scene and Badger died of old age, because they didn't mind killing off characters, and I didn't know that Badger didn't die in the books. I've never really felt very strongly about it, to be honest.
Perhaps that's the difference, because I never felt it was artistically justified. Again, I'm not guessing the emotional journey they're trying to take me on. Perhaps I was coloured by my knowledge of the books, indeed, as I formed those thoughts.
What I do find very affecting from Series 2 is the storyline that's based on the book The Fox Cub Bold, which I haven't read yet, which I'm expecting to find very boring. But in the cartoon series, I thought they pulled off the story, which I've read about on Wikipedia, what happens in the book, and it's pretty much exactly the same. Fox and Vixen's bold young son, Bold, feels that he doesn't have room to grow and be himself in White Deer Park under the shadow of his father, the famous Farthing Wood Fox. So he goes out into the world to try life on his own, and he doesn't really have any experience of the real world and doesn't fear man, even though he's probably heard that they're dangerous. He doesn't really understand.
So he gets more and more beaten up and injured as he goes along, really.
Yes, he's cocky and overconfident, and he's also, in a way, hampered by the values of Farthing Wood, because he starts getting into trouble by helping Shadow the Badger out of a trap, which hits him in the face and blinds him in one eye, and catching a pheasant for her. Mind you, he's been catching pheasants for himself all day. So then obviously the farmers cross and shoots him, and Bold, being half blind, can't even see that he's coming, and he gets shot in the leg, and he ends up completely maimed and helpless. And I've read on Wikipedia that, or perhaps it was the Farthing Wood wiki, but anyway, I've read on some sort of wiki that this is exactly what happens in the book. So he goes to the town and meets Whisper, who everybody hates.
Well, she's a right bitch.
Because she takes pity on him and helps him to catch rats, and then discovers that he is the son of the famous Farthing Wood Fox, and then agrees to be his mate, and then gets pregnant by him, and then says, right, you're taking me to White Deer Park so I can have the babies there, which kills him, both because physically it wears him out, and emotionally he doesn't want to go back to the park, so he loses the will to live.
Just like Pheasant.
And you get, at the end of the series, Fox and Vixen crying over Bold's mutilated, thin, tired, dead body. And I did find that very moving, even as the very insensitive child that I was.
Whisper is a right cow and a right user, and when she's becoming all contrite, "Oh, Bold, forgive me, Bold," you think, "Oh, it's a bit late now, isn't it, you stupid cow?" But I do find, and have always found, that Bold sequence extremely bleak. And you summed it up perfectly there, the themes, and what do we take away from it? Life's crap, get used to it.
I don't know about in the book, but in the TV series, in the same episode, Bold's been saying, perhaps my father was right, animals should look after each other because Shadow and Crow have been helping him to survive, and also Fox is saying maybe Bold was right about something that was going on with Scarface. So maybe they were going for everyone should listen to each other and respect each other, but possibly they take it a little bit far with what happens to Bold.
Yeah, that was very well done, actually, on the TV series, as you were pointing out, the juxtaposition there of Bold and Fox learning from each other at last when it's kind of too late. And that's something that can't actually be taken from the books as such, because the events of Fox's feud and the Fox Cub Bold do not run concurrently in the books, which they do in the TV series. In the books, Scarface is dead and gone, and then new thing, Bold goes off and has his whole sequence of events. So again, that's something I think that the TV series has improved on, made those links and done better thematically, and perhaps has given us something to take away that we don't get from the books.
Of course, another problem with the books is that all the characters are men, which is very misogynistic. In Watership Down, most of the characters are men, but that's part of the plot. In the cartoon series, they make 4 of the 8 singles female: Weasel, Adder, Owl, and Kestrel, and then Fox, Badger, Mole, and Toad are males, and I approve of that, and then the other animals are couples.
Yes, that was a very good change for the TV series, one that quite right to make.
And if you want to know which character has absolutely nothing interesting to say or do in the book and is taken in completely a different direction and has loads of character in the cartoon, that would be Weasel.
Yeah, Weasel's such a memorable character in the cartoon, not just for her awful singing. The third series, The Animals of Farthing Wood, was on CBBC in September 1995, so like a year and a half after the second series had finished. But we, and anyone else who had been wise enough to subscribe to Farthing Wood Friends a few years earlier, had read all about the series and seen screenshots of the series with the dialogue underneath in the Tales of Farthing Wood section in Farthing Wood Friends. It was very useful, actually, Farthing Wood Friends at first, when we hadn't seen the first part of the first series. We were able to catch up with that in the Tales of Farthing Wood section. And then at the very end of Farthing Wood Friends, which had 130 issues, they did stick in the third series before it aired on the telly. And I guess the air date was probably pushed back from the beginning of 1995 to September 1995. Goodness knows why, but it was rather fun, wasn't it, having the whole series played out in Farthing Wood Friends first. Felt kind of privileged.
Yes, it was certainly a new way of getting into the new series.
So by the time we watched it and recorded it in the final third of 1995, we already knew exactly what was going to happen. Now, one thing they'd done very deliberately, I have read and probably worked out, is reduce the death rate in it. Some characters who are killed off in the final 2 books, in The Path of the Storm and Battle for the Park, do get to survive in the TV series. I'm really thinking there of Toad and also Mossy. They both get reprieve moments in the TV series, and rightly so, I think. Who does actually die in the third series. You get the white stag at the very beginning to show us the stream is poisoned. You get Sinuous, who is Ada's mate, and he is introduced just so he can be strangled by a great big town rat. And that's about it, apart from various unnamed rat hordes. And one reprieve I don't approve of is Bully, who gets to wander off at the end. Yes, Cleo, Weasel's daughter, bites his tail off, but that's hardly the fitting, violent end such an antagonist as Bully deserves. In the book, he is ripped to shreds by Vixen, who throws him over the park boundary, going, "This is for Toad," etc., which I think is a much more striking ending.
It's very strange not to kill the main antagonist. Scarface got killed, of course, by Ada. And it was really annoying us, wasn't it? Ada herself had ample opportunity to kill Bully. She kept invading his lair, and we were like, bite him! Just bite him once!
I'm going after their leader,
No,
Bully.
But you're not going to do anything when you find him.
Kill him then when you get there.
So that was irritating, and yes, he ought to have been killed by Vixen or Weasel's daughter Cleo, or anyone, really.
I said earlier that the Siege of White Deer Park wasn't developed per se into the cartoon, and it wasn't, but like the second series, this does borrow some aspects from the Siege of White Deer Park, mainly the Wildcat, who is the main antagonist in the Siege of White Deer Park, the book, and becomes part of Weasel and Measley and Cleo and Fido's little sub-family adventure, where they're going off, leaving White Deer Park, leaving the rats to run rampant over it, and the Wildcats get involved with all that. It's very cartoony, the Weasel's adventures around the local area, and it's the one thing that really isn't based on anything from the books and is just supposed to be kind of funny and for the target audience. And I suppose it doesn't work badly. A lot of that was making me laugh, actually, wasn't it?
Yes, well, as I was saying, Weasel in the book is frickin' boring as crap. Whereas in the cartoon, they make her a funny character, if you like that sort of thing, a comedy character anyway. They give her a comedy mate, Measley. She completely bullies him and is horrible to him, and he adores her and would do anything for her, you know, the kind of thing. And they wanted to do something with these characters and give them some children. They might have been tempted to give them their own spin-off, but then they said, well, we can't really do that. Let's get them out of the park doing things on their own and meeting donkeys and pigs and doing fun things.
Yes, I did think that Weasel should have been rather less abusive to Measley by the end of the whole thing. Sometimes she wasn't abusive, and then at other times she was overly abusive and then said, "Oh, I love you anyway," and give him a kiss, which I didn't really think made up for all the emotional abuse she'd been subjected to.
Of course, at the end, when they've had to live in various different homes and get antagonised by various different animals, Weasel's saying, "Oh, Measley, what are we going to do now?" And he gets a power moment where he's like, "I'm putting my foot down, Weasel. We're going back to White Deer Park."
Yes, Measley, you're right. You think that should be the end of any kind of nastiness in their relationship, but it really isn't. But yeah, that was a good moment, actually. Also in Series 3, you've got Owl off on her own, looking for a mate, even though she's old and tatty. And in the books, she finds, or he finds in the books, Holly. And that has become Hollow in the cartoon series. And I always found it quite interesting how Owl flies back to what was once Farthing Wood, now a housing estate. Farthinghurst being the name of the big house, where Owl gets trapped in the attic and has a chat with the cat.
"They'll say I brought you in. I'm always bringing things in. It's an indiscretion." She does it anyway.
Yes.
Typical.
Just like our cat. Knows full well it's wrong, but just can't be bothered to be good. It's a good scene, that, with Owl and the cat. And that's from In the Path of the Storm, the whole Owl sequence, because it ends up with the Great Hurricane of 1987, which dates the book rather well, blowing Owl out of the tree and knocking the concrete off his or her wings.
Or her whole body, in the case of the cartoon series.
Yeah, there's too much concrete on her in the cartoon series. And that's linked in rather nicely with the rats back in White Deer Park, which is the battle for the park aspect that is included in the series. I loves an hurricane, says Bully.
Bully was making me laugh, wasn't he?
Yes.
He was very much a comedy villain.
What I didn't like so much about Series 3 was it was very all over the place. Cut to Owl, cut to Weasel, cut to White Deer Park, cut to a point in the scene where Ada goes to find Bully and doesn't do anything to him. It didn't have the cohesion that I think it needed to take us on the right kind of journey, emotional journey, coherent journey that we needed.
It's not as good, is it, Series 3? And they've changed the animation style as well. And it looks horrible.
They're much too anthropomorphized, aren't they?
Yes, Owl does too many gestures with her wings. And, in Series 1, Weasel is quadrupedal. In Series 2, she starts off quadrupedal. And Measley's occasionally quadrupedal, but he mostly goes around being bipedal, and she picks up bad habits from him and becomes bipedal herself. And then in the third series, they really only get on all fours when they're in a terrific hurry, which I find quite annoying. I like, if they're supposed to be animals in the wild who don't wear clothes or anything, I like them to be animals, not anthropomorphic.
Yeah, I do think they should have kept them more animally in their movements and expressions and gestures than they did in Series 3.
Speak to Richard Adams.
The other aspect of Series 3 that we haven't mentioned, of course, is the deer fights, the white deer herd stags fighting over who's going to be in charge after the death of the white stag, and that's from In the Path of the Storm, the book. And it always made us laugh because they don't like Trey, the big blustering stag who bullies everyone, and Mossy's going, "Come on, the one who isn't Trey," and we like that. And then part of that is the expansion of the park. I quite like the bit where Fox says, "Oh, the warden's taking animals off in cages. I don't believe it's anything bad then. He wouldn't do anything to hurt us." And Fox is right. He's actually expanding White Deer Park, though the animals don't understand that and wonder why Plucky has been driven away in a lorry.
Plucky being Fox's grandson.
Or in the books, great-grandson.
That's right. He's the baby that Whisper had, but presumably there are others. We did think they ought to animate some more foxes in red foxes and blue foxes, because Scarface was a blue fox. I don't remember if we mentioned that. Although we did say his mate was called Lady Blue, which might have been a clue. But anyway, what actually happened there was that his son Ranger and Fox's daughter Charmer got together, and then their tribes were able to live in peace. And by the way, in case you are wondering, blue fox is actually nonsense, but they had to do it so that we could tell which fox was which in the cartoon series. And actually, if you look at a picture of an Arctic fox in summertime when it doesn't have its winter coat on, it doesn't look that different from Scarface.
Yes, dramatically, there's a lot more foxes in Series 3 than they actually bother drawing on the screen, and that is rather annoying. I mean, they could have at least bothered drawing Friendly in for the whole series, who is another of Fox and Vixen's offspring, even if they weren't going to bother drawing in all the blue foxes who joined the gang, as it were.
And Whisper's other children.
And of course, and it would have been very useful to have them all there to fight the rats. But there we are. Perhaps in some ways, Series 3 is less traumatic, more suitable for a young audience. In some ways it's quite disappointing. In some ways it's rather funny. No bats in it, boring. As the bats in the Belfry say about the story of the Animals of Farthing Wood travelling to White Deer Park. And now whenever we're going to say something boring, we have to say no bats in it, so you can see how funny and memorable that is. So it has its pluses as well as its minuses. Before we finish, let's just mention the voice work a little more than we have already. We were particularly impressed with the ladies doing the voices, weren't we? There are 3 ladies doing the voices, and it's not always obvious who is the same as whom. Which female characters actually have the same voice actress. I think probably the way to work it out, if you wanted to, would be to get the sheeps scene from Series 3, where Rollo, who's an amusing character as St. Bernard, has become a sheepdog.
I'm always quoting that. I'm the sheepdog, you're the sheeps. What I say goes. I'm always wanting to say that when I'm teaching a class and the students are arguing with me. But if I said that, they might not get it.
We can get very nasty if we're called sheeps once too often. It's quite a good scene, that, in Series 3.
By the way, Rollo is one of the animals who helped Bold not to die.
Bold pup, he says when he meets Plucky. But I think you could get from that the three women actors as sheep, ewes, sounding pretty much like themselves, but just doing that to be sheep, and you could try and trace the other female characters from there.
It'd be tough though, wouldn't it? I can't tell who's who. The only thing where I get a bit of a cross is, well, obviously the male squirrel is Weasel, isn't he?
Oh yes, the squirrels are a lesbian couple.
Yes, or if you want to interpret it like that, because they do both sound like women. But also, Whistler's mate, Speedy, has quite a lot of lines near the beginning of Series 2, in the winter bit, where she's catching crayfish and stuff. And then Kestrel starts sounding an awful lot like her.
Oh yes, Kestrel and Speedy have a lot of overlap, actually. I mean, I think a lot of the additional female voices in Series 3, we were saying, well, that's Ada without going like that.
The cat was Ada doing a cat voice, wasn't she?
Yes, and then there was the owl who speaks to proper owl about her handsome mate. You know who! And that was very much like Ada. But very talented voice work there from the three ladies.
Well done, the girls.
With the men, it's a lot more obvious. Rupert Farley, who did Fox, doesn't have a lot of different voices, and you can tell that he's doing Pheasant and Mr. Newt and Hare.
Trey, I don't like weasels.
So he's doing a northern accent for Trey, and Plucky is just his Fox voice, but sounding rather young and enthusiastic.
And Fido, the young male weasel.
Oh yeah, and he does that.
Which is a very good voice for him, actually.
So he does do some careful and well-judged voice work, Rupert Farley, but it's easy to tell when you hear him. He does that Terrapin, who's on drugs, man. We're not stoned, man. We're terrapins. Which is a rather interesting way to vary your voice. And then, when we were watching the first series, I said, Jeremy Barrett, he only does, doesn't he, Mole and Rabbit. And I actually think they give him a lot of new voice work to do in Series 2, despite what Wikipedia lists say. I'm quite convinced that Jeremy Barrett moves on to do the Warden, Scarface, Ranger, because the new actor they get for Series 2, John Glover, I know his voice quite well from a radio show I listen to, and I can hear it quite clearly in Friendly, Bold, Crow, Measley, the Warden's Cat, and several others are John Glover.
Well, you know, whoever writes those wikis thinks that Speedy and Kestrel are different women, so you can't set too much store by what they say.
And then, of course, the one actor who did get mentioned during our main part of the podcast was Ron Moody, who is very, very famous for appearing in many, many things, such as Summer Holiday and A Kid in King Arthur's Court, and for playing Fagin on stage and screen many, many times. And I think Ron Moody channeled some of Fagin into Bully, not for the voice, but for the demeanour, for the character, and the way he treats his rats. Bully loves you all! It's quite like the way Fagin is in the Oliver musical with, I'm going to call them the Lost Boys. They're not the Lost Boys.
No.
The Orphans. Well, they are the Lost Boys.
They've got nowhere else to go.
Yes. And it was interesting, because you thought of that too, didn't you, when we were watching Series 3?
Yes, well, I'd recently watched Oliver on DVD, and it did strike me. Possibly I watched them only a day apart.
As I was mentioning, talking about Series 1, Ron Moody does a lot of the voice work. I mean, you hear him doing at least 3 or 4 characters in every episode. I think that one with Bold and Rollo is probably about the only one where he's just one character, just Rollo, I think. But he's a heck of a lot of people. Mr. Vole, Mr. Fieldmouse,
Badger, Toad, White Stag.
Whistler, all the edible frogs who turn up at various points.
And some of those guest stars we were talking about, Tom and the horse.
And the cat who sees the animals going in the pool and stuff. Most voices and additional voices you can hear Ron Moody in them. And I thought he was doing a particularly fine job, actually, with his voice variety and his interpretations. I've always found him very entertaining as an actor.
Yes, brilliant. You might think he was a bit too good for the Animals of Farthing Wood, but evidently he didn't think so.
I expect he was hired for his kind of old, gruff sound. He must have been, in his late 60s and early 70s whilst recording Farthing Wood, so that's jolly good for Badger. Not that he got to be Badger in Series 3, of course. So I think he's certainly a great asset to the voice acting team.
Of course, for Series 3 along comes Shadow, who was in the Bold storyline, and gets together with the new badger, Hercule, who is completely arbitrary, isn't he? He's not in the books at all, and he's got a Welsh accent, and he's kind, and it used to make us roar with laughter when he'd say he was sorry he was late for the meeting, and we found a bee, didn't we, Mossy?
Yes, of course, he's John Glover as well.
Ah, yes, and Mossy, when we were talking about Badger thinking he was Mole, he wasn't too keen, but then he was very sad when Badger died, and then in Series 3 he sees Shadow and Hercule, and he gets all excited, and he says, Badgers!
I love badgers!
And he climbs up onto Hercule, and he smells him, and he goes, that badgery smell! And Jake goes, he's addicted to badgers now.
It's become quite disturbing by then, hasn't it?
It's a bit weird, but anyway.
And that's what I was saying earlier. I do think they could have had Shadow and Hercule getting involved in the plot if they wanted, and still had Badger himself on hand as a wise old father figure to go to. Plenty of foxes, so why not 3 badgers? But there we are. So there we go. 3 series, many books, chat about the voice work there, little insights into Farthing Wood Friends, which was a very good, fun, nature, learn and play series of magazines, which had a lot of interesting facts and figures and puzzles and activities, and was a good way to enhance the experience of being an Animals of Farthing Wooder in the 90s, I would say.
Yes, very much so. We used to really look forward to those coming in the post.
And so there we are. Another podcast comes organically to an end. But let's take a moment to think about next time. I wonder what the podcast will be about.
Well, I thought since you mentioned Sir Blaze, somehow you mentioned him whilst talking about Watership Down, we ought to talk about the show he's from, which is Blazing Dragons.
I know, he's Silver the Rabbit.
That's right, nepotism.
Yes. Blazing Dragons next time. Very interesting, and hopefully you'll join us for that and find it so. Until then, thanks for listening, and good night out there.
Whatever you are.